The room had gone from tense to explosive. Barnes was cornered, the crowd buzzing with anger, and for the first time, the board members weren't blindly backing him. One of them, a quiet woman named Lynn, finally stood up and said what everyone was thinking. This isn't about rules anymore. It's about one person trying to control everyone else. That was the moment everything shifted. A motion was made to delay the vehicle rule amendment until a full neighborhood vote could be held. People clapped. Barnes tried to object, but this time, no one was listening. The board voted right then and there. Majority ruled in favor of the delay. The amendment was dead, at least for now. And just like that, the tank stayed. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I just sat there while Barnes gathered his things and stormed out, not even waiting for the meeting to end. Over the next few days, the neighborhood felt different. People I barely knew waved at me. One guy even dropped off donuts and said, "Thanks for standing up for all of us." But just when things felt like they were finally settling down, I got a knock at my door. It was a city inspector, official badge, clipboard, everything. He was polite, said he got a call about an abandoned military vehicle and had to follow up. I asked if Barnes had sent him, and he just smiled and said, "Let's just say your HOA's been busy." I showed him all the paperwork, every license, every zoning code I had followed. After a quick look around, he nodded and said, "You're good here." As he walked away, I noticed a car parked across the street. Same one I'd seen before. Same person behind the wheel, still watching. Only this time, it wasn't someone from the HOA. A few days later, I got an email from a local museum. They'd heard about the tank and wanted to talk. Looks like the story wasn't over after all. The email from the museum turned out to be the start of something unexpected. They'd seen photos of the tank circulating online, thanks to a few viral neighborhood posts, and were interested in displaying it as part of a local military history exhibit. At first, I laughed it off. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The tank had already made its point here, and if it could now serve a bigger purpose, why not? So a few weeks later, with the help of a flatbed and some volunteers, the tank was carefully moved out of my driveway and delivered to the museum. The neighborhood was quiet that day. Some people watched from their windows. A couple even came out and thanked me again, this time for keeping things from going too far. Funny how people change once the dust settles. As for Barnes, he resigned from the HOA board not long after. No official statement, just a short email citing personal reasons. A new board was voted in, and let's just say, they seem more interested in listening than lecturing. Steve and Maria even volunteered to help rewrite a few of the outdated rules to reflect what the neighborhood actually wants, not just what one guy decided. Looking back, it all started with a simple RV and a stubborn rulebook. I never planned to make a statement. I just didn't want to be pushed around. But sometimes, standing your ground does more than prove a point. It wakes people up. It shows that fairness matters more than appearances. And yeah, maybe it takes a tank to make that clear. So if there's one thing I learned, it's this. Don't mess with someone who knows the rules better than the ones enforcing them, especially if they've got a sense of humor and access to military surplus. It all started with what seemed like a harmless RV parked in my own driveway. Nothing fancy, just a regular motorhome I used for weekend getaways and family trips. I never thought something so simple would stir up such chaos in my neighborhood. But then came the dreaded letter from the HOA, those lovely folks who always seem to have way too much time on their hands. According to them, my RV was a violation of community standards, and I had exactly 7 days to move it or face fines. No warnings, no discussion, just a flat-out demand. I tried reasoning with them. I even offered to keep it covered and out of sight. But nope, they weren't having it. One board member in particular seemed to have it out for me. He made it personal, throwing in snide remarks during meetings and pushing even harder for enforcement. That's when I decided, if they wanted to play hardball, I'd give them something to really talk about. So instead of removing my RV, I replaced it with a decommissioned military tank. Yep, you heard that right. An actual tank. No weapons, of course, but fully restored and completely legal to own. I parked it right where the RV used to sit, clean as a whistle and within every legal guideline they couldn't touch. You should have seen their faces the next morning, pure shock and disbelief. Some neighbors loved it, others, not so much. But the HOA? They went into full meltdown mode. What followed was a wild mix of angry emails, emergency board meetings, and even a visit from local code enforcement. But here's the kicker. They couldn't find a single rule that I had broken. Not one. And that's when the real drama began. Because when entitled people don't get their way, they don't just back down. They double down. Turns out the HOA president, let's call him Mr. Barnes, had a reputation. Retired, very proud of his lawn, and apparently on a mission to keep the neighborhood looking like some kind of showroom. He was the kind of guy who measured grass height with a ruler and sent warning letters if your trash bins were out 5 minutes late. People tolerated him, mostly because it was easier than dealing with his constant complaints. But the tank? That was something he couldn't ignore. Within hours of parking it, I got my first friendly reminder letter about maintaining community image. I laughed and tossed it. 2 days later, another letter came, this time citing unusual, vehicles not typical for residential neighborhoods. Still nothing in the rules about tanks. They were scrambling. And honestly, I think the thing that got to them most wasn't the tank itself. It was the fact that they couldn't control it. Neighbors started talking. Some thought it was hilarious. A few even stopped by to take pictures with it. But others, mostly the ones who always seemed to side with the HOA, weren't amused. One lady claimed it made the neighborhood feel like a war zone. Another guy said it was scaring his dog. But again, no one could actually point to a rule I was breaking. Then things got weird. I noticed someone taking photos of my house from across the street, same car, parked in different spots every day. A few days later, I got a note on my door. No return address, just a single line. You've made your point. Now remove the tank. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a petty HOA argument anymore. This was personal. But I wasn't backing down. I followed the rules, played their game, and now they were trying to change it mid-match. Little did they know, I had a few. More surprises they wouldn't see coming. A few days after that anonymous note, things really started heating up. I noticed the HOA newsletter had a new section, something like community safety concerns, with a not-so-subtle picture of my tank blurred just enough to avoid calling me out by name. It warned residents about unusual military-style vehicles and how they could impact property values. Classic scare tactic. But here's the thing. They still couldn't name a single bylaw I'd broken. Meanwhile, I started hearing from more neighbors. One guy, Steve, who lived 2 streets over, pulled me aside while I was mowing the lawn. He told me about how Barnes tried to fine him for having a hammock in his front yard. Another neighbor, Maria, said she once got written up for having sunflowers that were too tall. Turns out I wasn't the only one fed up with the HOA's power trip, just the first to stand up in such a loud, visible way. But not everyone was on my side. One evening, I noticed a small crack in the tank's windshield. Just a chip, but it wasn't there before. Could have been a rock, but it didn't feel like an accident. I installed a couple of cameras around the driveway just in case. That's when things got even more interesting. I caught someone walking past late at night, stopping to take pictures. Hood up, head down, but definitely not just out for a walk. At the same time, the HOA started pushing a new amendment to the neighborhood rules. They were trying to fast-track it through a vote, something about banning non-traditional recreational or military vehicles. Funny how fast they could move when something actually threatened their control. The meeting to decide the change was scheduled for the following week. I knew this wasn't just about the tank anymore. This was about control, pride, and the quiet war brewing behind neatly trimmed hedges and white picket fences. And I wasn't the only one ready to fight back. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, you could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just another boring community gathering. This one had weight. Flyers had gone out. People were whispering in driveways, and you could tell this whole tank situation had split the neighborhood right down the middle. Some saw me as the guy standing up to petty rules, and others thought I was turning the block into a circus. Either way, nobody was ignoring it anymore. I showed up early to the clubhouse where the meeting was being held, mostly to get a seat in the back and keep a low profile. But as soon as I walked in, Barnes gave me a cold stare from across the room. The agenda was already printed and passed out. Right there at the top, vote to amend vehicle regulations. No subtlety, no dancing around it. This was a full-blown power play. The room filled up fast. More people than I'd ever seen at one of these things. Everyone was buzzing. Some came to watch the show. Others came to make sure their voices were heard. I noticed Maria and Steve were there too, sitting together near the front. A few of the board members looked nervous, flipping through papers, like they weren't sure what would happen. Then the meeting started. Barnes opened with a speech that was clearly meant to paint me as the villain, talking about maintaining the character of the neighborhood and setting a dangerous precedent. He never said my name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. A few people nodded along, but others were clearly uncomfortable. Then the floor opened up for comments, and that's when it got wild. One neighbor stood up and called the amendment ridiculous. Another demanded to know why the board was fast-tracking rules just to settle a personal grudge. Voices were raised, people interrupted, and the calm, quiet suburban atmosphere cracked open. Right as things reached a boiling point, Barnes slammed his gavel and demanded order. But it was too late. The neighborhood wasn't quiet anymore, and neither was I. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get any more chaotic, Barnes stood up again and dropped a bombshell. He claimed to have received an official complaint from someone outside the neighborhood, someone who had apparently felt threatened by the sight of the tank, and reported it to a local zoning committee. He waved around a folded piece of paper like it was proof, but wouldn't let anyone read it. The room went quiet for a moment. That wasn't just HOA drama anymore. If it was true, outside authorities could get involved. My stomach dropped. Up to this point, I had stayed within every rule. But zoning issues, that was a whole different game. I asked to see the complaint. Barnes refused, saying it was confidential. That's when Steve, who'd been quiet until now, stood up and said loudly, "Funny how it's always confidential when it backs him up." People laughed, but under the surface the mood was shifting. Then came the second twist. Maria stood up and handed out copies of an email she had dug up from a public records request. Turns out, Barnes had already contacted the zoning office. Himself. The so-called complaint wasn't from a concerned outsider. It was from him. He'd tried to get the city involved by claiming my tank was a safety hazard, even after the HOA's own rules couldn't touch it. Now people were really upset. This wasn't just about a vehicle anymore. It was about one man trying to bend the system behind everyone's backs. A few board members looked shocked. They clearly hadn't known about the email. Barnes's face turned bright red, and he tried to deflect, but the damage was done. That's when I realized this fight had turned into something bigger than me and my tank. The cracks in the HOA's control were now out in the open, and the neighborhood wasn't going to look away anymore. But I also knew that people like Barnes don't go down without a fight. And the next move? It was going to be the biggest one yet.